I always struggle a little bit when I'm introduced as Dr. Thomas M. Anderson because my hospital ID originally said Thomas M. Anderson, MD, Jr. And my wife always says, "Are you an MD Jr. or Junior MD?" I am humbled to stand before you this morning. Let me thank the leaders on this stage, friends and colleagues in the audience, physicians who couldn't attend our House of Delegates, and my family for your support, your kindness and your encouragement during my growth in ISMS leadership. I see in our group a large number of past presidents, many of whom have been excessively kind to me, and I would have to single out Leroy Sprang and Dick Jeline, who picked me up early on and started me on this path, Peter O'Pierre, Bill McDade, and the inimitable Swami. You know who you are. You may not want to claim this pup that you trained up, but I am grateful. It's a special privilege to be sworn in here in Springfield. Last year we honored the Society's 175th anniversary. It was here in Springfield that our founders in 1840 laid the groundwork for building our society. Those were different times. It took commitment to gather the few Illinois doctors interested in embracing a common basis for medical care in Illinois. The Society's oldest records tell of a shaky first few years while our organization took root. In our earliest days, the Illinois State Medical Society had periods of inconsistent meeting while the fledgling organization formed. During our history, there have been times when the organization's activities have diminished, times of public health crisis, or when our nation was at war. There have been changes in the practice of medicine and in the environment in which medicine is practiced over the years. I have only to look at my own family over 4 generations of doctors to see how these things have affected us as family. My great-uncle Howard was a family practice doctor who delivered babies back in the era when that was possible. He practiced in the mountains of West Virginia, Welch, West Virginia, a coal mining town. We would call that a rural practice today. He worked with his patients, and there wasn't always a lot of money for payment, especially during the Depression years. So a visit to the doctor might yield something for the cook pot. Delivering the plumber's wife of a baby might bring some attention to the pipes in the bathroom. Kind of a barter system. There wasn't any medical insurance when Uncle Howard was practicing. And then in those days, my father, as a boy, used to go around to visit with his uncle, making house calls. The houses were often scattered up and down the valleys and mountains to the point where the railroad tracks were kind of the best route to get there. But there were tunnels and there were trestles, and you had to be kind of careful because every now and then there were trains pulling the coal out of the area. And the engineers had this novel notion that they had right of way on the tracks over the doctor and his nephew. It was especially challenging at night because they didn't want to carry lanterns. The hardworking coal miners were accustomed to coming out on the hilltops and sitting around having a little beverage, and sometimes the beverage was out of a mason jar without a tax stamp or a label. And when they'd had enough of it, they would pull out a pistol and take a shot or two at whatever light they saw down in the valley. But it was a time when the doctor-patient relationship was very personal, even though the methods of diagnosis and the tools of treatment were perhaps limited compared to what we now have. My father trained as an orthopedic surgeon in reconstructive surgery, and he had imagined he was going to build a career on helping children who had been crippled by polio as his life's work. As he finished his fellowship, World War II broke out, so he ended up out in the South Pacific with the Marines, island hopping and doing trauma-related surgery that was of a very different kind. When he returned to civilian practice, it was just in time for the Salk vaccine and the Cox and Sabin versions that came thereafter, and suddenly there was no more polio. So his career arc became trauma surgeon based on accidents, largely motor vehicles and motorcycles. The man wouldn't even let me talk about motorcycles in the house, let alone try and talk about sitting on one. He was paid most of the time by employer-provided health insurance on a fee-for-service basis, because after World War II, health insurance provided by the employer burgeoned, because during World War II, the factory workers would want pay raises, and the government viewed cash pay raises as inflationary. But health benefits provided by the employer was viewed okay. And similarly, he saw the rise of workmen's compensation insurance during his career, to the point where near the end of his practice days, he had to give away one day every 2 weeks to go sit in courtrooms and testify on behalf of his patients as they sought to obtain the workman's comp benefits that they had hoped to get. I went into medicine against my father's protestations. He was confident there was nothing useful to be had in the practice of medicine as times to come. And our practice was fee-for-service, independent group, separate billing. We had Medicare because that came in 1965. Doctors never knew how much care they were giving away for free until they started billing Medicare and getting paid for it. Then gradually the evolution of usual and customary as defined by the treating physician began to become a different thing as Medicare and the insurance companies started using usual and customary being what they intended to pay. And more recently, we have all experienced the consolidation of hospital ownerships, the gobbling up of practices, and the rise of the employed physicians. My daughter is a doctor. She's a pediatric critical care specialist. She's married to an anesthesiologist who does cardiovascular work. And when the two of them finished their training, they had no interest in practicing medicine independently. They wanted jobs. Now, the size of their debt after med school may have influenced that decision. The highly specialized nature of their training may have been a piece of it, but it all came down to the fact that being an employed physician was not only best for them, it was what they wanted, and it's how they live now. Great Uncle Howard, my daughter Ingrid, there's a big difference over 4 generations in the practice of medicine. Today, it seems, too often we are at war with ourselves. Even as the Illinois State Medical Society contends with a revolution in how doctors view themselves, how we practice medicine, and how systemic changes threaten the doctor-patient relationship, we must remain focused. The bedrock principles of our profession will guide us through changes that are on us, but only if we keep our hearts set and our eyes fixed on those principles. The key to this is going to have to be, again and again, engaging doctors and patients in the conversation about health care. We can't expect to just lobby the legislators at whatever appointed time and somehow make it happen. If our patients don't understand our perspectives on the delivery of care to them, they as voters are not going to be able to tell these people what is needed. When I say we must engage in the conversation about health care, I choose my words carefully. Engage does not mean to complain. Engage does not mean spending 20 minutes with the insurance company representative trying to justify the treatment as being in the best interest of my patient and therefore it should be a covered service. And engage does not mean to sling arrows at the other side because they don't agree with me. Don't get me wrong. We can't shy away from a fight. But are we choosing our battles or letting others choose them for us? Are we grasping at remnants of the past, or are we fighting for the best interests of our patients? In short, beating our heads against a wall or against each other is not engagement. Engagement is proactive, searching for solutions before the rest of the world even sees that there is a problem. Engagement is strategic, not being afraid of a fight, but picking the right battles at the right times in the right places and fighting them well. Engagement is constructive, not being defined by what we're against, but by making a clear case for the positive goals and searching for the most effective ways of achieving them. It's often tempting to take a reactive and defensive posture in circumstances like the ones we face. But if we give in to that temptation, the next generation of physicians will bear the consequences. Instead, I say again, we must engage doctors and patients in the conversation about health care. We must engage when we have better ideas to offer in improving patient care. I know that each of you had other things you could be doing this weekend, but you chose to be here to share your ideas and experience, to help our patients and inform our colleagues. We must engage when medical educations are under attack and the lines between doctor, provider, and healthcare person behind the counter become so muddled that our patients are hopelessly confused, cannot distinguish the kinds of care and people they should receive. I'm talking about scope of practice here, and for me it is personal. I have a daughter who was at a university health clinic in Chicago, which will remain nameless for purposes of this discussion. She went in with complaint of painful urination and was seen by a nurse practitioner and sent away after a brief interaction with what turned out to be the wrong antibiotic. She was back in that hospital several days later with a full-blown pyelonephritis. We were up against sepsis. We narrowly avoided the perinephric abscess requiring surgical drainage, and the renal function test kept climbing, and the nephrology consults were recommending dialysis. And you can only imagine my joy to find out that her initial visit, she had never seen a doctor, and as near as she remembered, the person examining her had never checked for tenderness in the costovertebral angles where her kidneys were. A more recent example would be kind of an interesting dichotomy in treatments that my wife Teresa experienced. Let's say 6 years ago, she tore a meniscus in one of her knees. She went to a different medical school teaching hospital in Chicago. And at that point, she was seen by an orthopedic surgeon who made a diagnosis of meniscal tear. She had an MRI, she had an arthroscopic surgery, and all was well. Fast forward to last year, she stepped off a curb and experienced sudden pain and the same kinds of symptoms in her other knee that she remembered from before. The knee swelled up, the knee was locked, at least to a full range of motion. She couldn't bear weight on the leg of interest without assistance. So she called up and went back to the same clinic where she'd been effectively treated the first time, and this time she saw a nurse practitioner who examined her, who ordered x-rays, and made the pronouncement that she had arthritis in her knee, and she did not have a meniscal tear because to her examination there was not enough complaint of pain. On further review, it turns out she never really asked my wife to stand on the sore leg, and she somehow didn't pick up on the lack of full range of motion. Teresa came home that evening as discouraged as I've seen her in a long time. So, with my encouragement, she got on the internet. She found her previous doctor. He was no longer at the place he had been, but he was still around. She made an appointment, saw him, had a diagnosis of meniscal tear, had an MRI, and had an arthroscopic surgery, which has turned out well. In the interval of however many years that was, the system had changed where she had been successfully treated to one where somehow she was no longer seeing a doctor on her initial contact with her complaints. I believe this is a powerful illustration supporting ISMS value and why it's important for us as physicians to heavily engage in scope of practice issues. If we're going to have nurse practitioners out front, whether when we run the practice or the administrators of the places we're employed run the practice, we have got to somehow make sure they are trained and monitor their performance so that the care they deliver, which ultimately will reflect back on us, is going to be anywhere near the standard we would expect of ourselves. Watering down our state's Medical Practice Act is viewed by many as easy and a harmless way to save money, expand access, and gain political capital of the voters. Our lawmakers usually have no healthcare background, and as they deliberate these changes, ISMS is often the only group willing and able to step in and explain how the contemplated changes will affect patient care. Of course, I add that many of our specialty societies do similar things when their particular specialty is somehow under fire, but ISMS is the only group engaged across all specialties. I'm sure if you ask an ISMS lobbyist, they will tell you that scope of practice time in Springfield is very much like a game of whack-a-mole. You may remember that. It was a board that had holes in it, and it had a hammer, and the thing would pop up, and you'd hit it, and it'd disappear, and then it'd come up over here. And so you hit it there, and it'd come up out there. Similarly, we stop a bill one year, and the next year that same bill returns, requiring our lobbyists' attention to educating the lawmakers again. Proponents of these bills are seeking to wear down the lawmakers or catch us off guard. It's up to us, everyone in this room, to make sure that that doesn't happen. I believe there are important merits of our training as physicians, and I think they stand on their own, but we must continue to engage to make sure our patients understand the distinctions. A lot of doctors are worn down and discouraged. Some of us in this room are worn down and discouraged, but this society must be a motivating force to help our members and inspire our non-members as advocacy for our patients and our profession. Given my personal experience, I'm obviously passionate about this, to say the least. As your president, whenever I am on the road or on a phone call with a legislator or a reporter or a colleague, I will be fully engaged in speaking on your behalf, not just on the critical importance of the physician-led medical team, but on every issue that this House identifies as a concern. I will do this knowing that each one of you is also working to engage with your colleagues, your elected representatives, and anyone else who cares about healthcare in Illinois. Thank you for trusting me with this great responsibility and for the honor of speaking with your voice this year. And before I close, I would like to add on a personal note, and I can see the senior leadership of the staff with the eyes rolling into their heads. Dear God, he's going off script. Somebody please turn off his microphone. But it is them I wish to speak about. Illinois State Medical Society has, and if this House doesn't know it, they need to hear it from me, a group of highly competent and passionately dedicated professional staff that support all the efforts of your leadership and the activities of this society throughout the year. It was best encapsulated by a colleague who recently said to Dr. Panton, you know, ISMS staff is really a good group of people. They make you guys look like it's easy up there. Thank you very much for the warm endorsement of our individual talents. But it is true. Al Lerner may pulled this group together, and he has held them together through times that have been tough on doctors in Illinois and equally tough on physician volunteer organizations like ours in Illinois. And we don't regularly give enough credit to the people that don't have MD by their name, that work and stay with us day after day, year after year. So, you know, even to the point of Mr. Lerner coming up to me and saying, "Tom, go brush the back of your hair down." You know, it's standing up. Man, if you got a bad cowlick, it's not going to respond to a brush. That's just the way it is. So I would ask you to join me in offering an expression of appreciation and recognition to the professional staff of the Illinois State Medical Society. Thank you.